Hi everyone, welcome to an interactive video on calculating market equilibrium after market changes. This is the majority of the work that you're going to be doing on market equilibrium, using what you've learned about demand and supply to predict changes to particular markets when certain economic events occur. Don't be too freaked out by that language. Once we get into it, you'll fully understand. Once you follow the process, then the rest kind of falls into place. So let's get into it. Okay, so I want to give you guys a process for to follow every time you get a question on demand and supply. This is going to carry forward into next year as well, so it's really important that we understand this process, and I want you guys to write it down in your exercise book so you can refer to it at any time. So after I've explained what each of these are, then pause the video until you're ready to move on to the total of 4 questions. Okay, so the first question whenever you're given a problem is you've got to ask yourself, does this change relate to demand or supply? Remember, I've told you guys before that whenever we're doing demand and supply questions, always only do demand or only do supply. We're never going to ask you a question that asks you how to show the effect on both demand and supply. Okay, the question will either have a clue in it that will hint whether it's the behavior of consumers or the behavior of suppliers that has changed. It will actually say the factor in the actual question, explain the change to the market for whiteboard markers after an increase in consumer confidence, for example. Or the third way is they'll actually say it. They'll just say on the demand side, comma, and then they'll go on and say the economic event has changed. So the first question you need to ask yourself, and we're going to practice annotating questions as well, which means circling keywords, drawing a little arrow, and then writing what that means. The first one you're going to ask yourself is this question a demand side event or a supply side event? And how to answer that is to ask yourself, well, whose behavior is changing? Okay, so in the event of consumer confidence, well, consumers in the name, so obviously that's the behavior of consumers, and so therefore that's going to be demand. Your second question that you're going to ask yourself is, okay, well, now we know demand has changed on the demand side. Now, is this a shift in demand or a movement along the demand curve? And this one's a really easy question to answer because if it is price that has changed in that particular market, well, it's just a movement along the curve. If it's any other factor that's changed, it's going to be a shift. Okay, so if it's price that has changed, it's movement. Otherwise, if it's any other factor, it's going to be a shift. And then our third question we ask ourselves is, okay, well, we figured out that it's demand or supply. We figured out if it's a shift or a movement. And then the third question we need to ask ourselves is this an increase or a decrease? So in the case of a shift, is demand or supply itself increasing or decreasing? Or if it's a movement along the curve, is it moving up or down the curve? Okay, is quantity supplied or quantity demanded increasing or decreasing? And then what we do is we actually draw that in a demand and supply chart. Now, you can get this in a particular question. It will actually ask you to draw it. But even if it doesn't, I want you guys to draw the change in the chart because that then enables us to ask this final question of, well, now that I've done all that and I've seen the effect on price and quantity, does that actually make sense? And that enables us to do a quick check. And if the answer doesn't make sense, we're going to go through that process in a tick. But if that answer doesn't make sense, well, either question 1, 2, or 3 has been answered incorrectly. And then that just gives you an opportunity to go back and check which one. Oh, that's right, it's price, so it's a movement or whatever mistake was made. It's usually that one, by the way. It's usually question 2 that we get wrong. Anyway, so let's go and practice, shall we? Okay, so I've given you an example here of a question, and on all of these, that process is going to be there in the corner. Explain the change to the market for orange juice after disposable income falls. Okay, now I've got a treat for you guys. I've got some fancy animations and stuff on this very first practice. The rest I'm going to get my trusty pen and just draw on the screen. So enjoy the straight lines and that you can actually figure out what's going on this one. Okay, so we're going to go through these questions. This is the process I want you to go through. Don't draw the chart yet. Okay, so that's exactly what. Oh, sorry. First thing we need to do is actually draw the blank demand and supply lines. Okay, so you're going to draw your demand line and then notate that with D1. You're then going to draw your supply line, notate that with supply one. You're then going to get your equilibrium point from where the lines meet out to the price axis and label that P1. And then you're going to go where they meet and all the way down till it hits the quantity axis, and you're going to go quantity 1. All right, now here we have the original state of the market. All right, and then we're going to always put a heading on our markets as well. So pause the video if you haven't been keeping up with this, because I want you guys to draw every single one of these in your books as we go. Pause the video here and get up to this point before we move on to answering the question. Okay, so you'll see we've got the blank demand and supply chart there. We haven't applied any changes yet. Yeah, this is like the base position for the market. The market is at equilibrium at that particular price and that particular quantity. That's the price and quantity at which suppliers and consumers are willing to exchange. So now let's go to the question. Explain the change to the market for orange juice after disposable income falls. Okay, now I've started with an easy one here. I've actually put a factor that shifts the demand curve in the question. So I would hope from here you would be able to figure out that it is demand that has changed here. And then we ask ourselves, okay, so what has changed here? Is it the price of orange juice or is it something else? I want you guys to answer this before I click it. And I'm hoping you would have said something else. Bonus question, which factor? It's in the question. So I hope you get this one right. Yes, it is a shift of the demand curve. And which factor? It's disposable income, which has obviously changed. This gets a little bit trickier when they don't actually put the word or the factor that has changed in the actual question. And most of the ones I've got here don't do that. We're on to question 3 now. Okay, so demand has changed, demand has shifted. Now, because of this, has the demand for orange juice fallen or increased? And you've got to ask yourself, okay, disposable income has fallen. So does that mean there'll be more demand or less demand for orange juice? Think about it, pause the video and write down your answer. And the answer here is it's actually a decrease. Now, if lots of you possibly would have said increase, but when disposable income falls, we've got less money to spend on goods and services, and so we decrease the amount that we demand goods and services. Okay, so now you'll see we draw the change in the chart. So get your attention to the right-hand side of the page, and this is how we do it. We just follow what questions we answered, 1, 2, and 3. So which line are you going to pay attention to? Well, it's demand. What are we going to do with demand? Well, we're going to shift the line. And which way are we going to shift it? Well, we're going to decrease it. And a decrease in demand, is that a shift to the right or the left? And it's a shift to the left. So you're going to draw that line there. Then you're going to notate that with D2, a little arrow. And then you're going to draw your new equilibrium point. Okay, so we see we've gone out from the price, from the equilibrium point where the new demand and the existing supply meet, out to the price axis, notate that with P2, and then we go down for a new Q2, and then some arrows to show the direction of movement. And this is the point at which you can ask yourself, does it make sense? Okay, and you've got to ask yourself, okay, if disposable income falls, you go back to the question, if people have less money, does it make sense that the quantity traded, which is the bottom axis there, the quantity traded of orange juice falls? Yeah, it does. Because if people have less money, they're going to buy less orange juice. And if people are buying less orange juice, there's going to be more orange juice available on the shelves. And so the suppliers are going to drop the price of that orange juice to get rid of it. So does it make sense the price falls? Yes, it does. And so when you've asked yourself those two questions by looking at the two axes, does it make sense? You can tick it off and know that you've got the question correct. All right. I'm going to stop this first video here, all right, and give you an opportunity to go over this practice one a couple of times if you need to. In the next video after this one, it's just going to be going through the practice questions. All right, so don't stop this video until you're completely fine and comfortable with the concept. And when you are,